Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Mark Graven. Our guest today is Elisabeth Swan. She's a returning guest from episode 389. If you want to go and check that out, I'll link to it in the show notes. I'll tell you more about Elisabeth in a minute, but most recently, she's the author of a new book. It's outstanding. It's titled Picture Yourself a Leader, Illustrated Micro Lessons for Navigating Change. And it was the other day I noticed not just a blip, but it's been there for a while. Number one new release in the Amazon TQM category, total quality management, that little bit old term there. But before I tell you more about Elisabeth, welcome to the podcast. Congratulations again on the launch of the book and being off to a good start.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. It's great to be here.
I don't know why that became such a speed bump for me. Like it does. Before we talk a little more about your bio in this book, like it's curious to me that category is still called total quality management.
It's a really ancient term. When I give people like the history of, process improvement, continuous improvement, I'll say, well, back in the day, there's this TQM acronym, total quality, just like we don't hear it anymore.
Right. And it's funny, when Amazon was founded and started selling books, I think TQM was already a little bit in the rearview mirror in terms of popularity compared to terms Lean and Six Sigma and what have you. But I mean, the methods work. The lineage is clearly visible, I think, in both Lean and Six Sigma.
Yeah, it also it keeps changing. I know you know how the algorithms will bounce you around. But in the morning I'll see, oh, I'm number one in lean management. Oh, I'm number one in industrial relations with Katie Anderson next to me. You know what I mean? Like sort of it just keeps shifting. But yeah, the TQM was like, interesting.
Yeah. And I didn't mean to imply that you and I are both ancient for knowing and having been around. They were still
around.
They were still teaching TQM in the late 90s when I was in grad school, that academia sometimes lags behind the private sector, and they've shifted since.
Yeah.
But
no, I was in a consulting firm in the early 90s, and that was pre sort of lean being a buzzword and pre Six Sigma. And it was, TQM was out there and setup reduction and, these things basically, this firm was part of the rebuild of Japan after World War II. So anyway, yeah, I sort of put together all these terms over time. It's like they shift.
Yeah. And again, if you want to hear in the last episode with Elisabeth, she told a little bit more of her continuous improvement origin story. We won't go through all that again today, but episode 389, if you want to check that out. So a little bit more about Elisabeth. She's consulted with business process performance for over 30 years. You said that before I did, the 30. I'm almost at 30
Just
years.
To drive home how long I've been working.
Elisabeth's experience spans from helping local nonprofits to guiding Fortune 100 companies through lean transformations. Among other things, she is the co-designer and lead instructor for the Lean Six Sigma leadership course at University of California, San Diego, or UCSD. She's the co-founder of the Just-in-Time Café with Tracy ORourke. She's also the co-host of the Just-in-Time Café podcast with Tracy. And previously, she co-wrote, again, with Tracy, partner in crime here, The Problem Solver's Toolkit, a surprisingly simple guide to your Lean Six Sigma journey. And again, the new book, solo endeavor here, Picture Yourself a Leader. I hope people will check that out. Elisabeth and Tracy have both been very involved. Let me give one other mention here in a group, very active during pandemic times. We still have a website. We haven't met in a while. Leancommunicators.com is a website where you can find kind of all of our podcasts and YouTube channels collected together. So, thank you, Elisabeth, for your participation and, sharing and learning. That was that was after we did the podcast last time. I know. Let me just ask you about this. I mean, like, what were your thoughts about kind of, collaborating and helping out and learning from other lean podcasters?
That was incredibly enjoyable. The people were interesting people. And I also felt like everybody brought something different and just addressed, some of it was technical, like mics and audio and quality of, and choosing whether to do both audio and video. And also fun to bring, people brought other information in, like apps, or I'm surrounded where I am with a public radio community, and got a friend who's a voice coach to come in and just talk about what really helps when you're speaking, sort of thinking about those things. So that was just really rich, I thought, and fun. I looked forward to it.
Yeah, it was a great group. And there was a helpful spirit and collegiality. I mean, I think even going back to 2005, when a couple of people were starting off with blogging, like everybody, even though you're competing for eyeballs, quote unquote, or with the podcast, okay, you're competing for time, attention, ears, eyes. But I think back to those days of blogging, I think people were trying to expand the size of the pie and help each other out. And I appreciate that spirit that we most often, like, it's an outlier if that doesn't seem the case, I think, in the lean community, whether it's among authors, podcasters, consultants.
It's a really good point. It is a generous community. There isn't a sense of, it's, part of our ethos is a rising tide lifts all boats, right? The more people know this and can benefit, the better off we all are. So I feel that it feels strong in that community, which is nice.
Yeah. So thank you to everybody who is sharing and learning and helping each other out. One other thing I want to mention before we get into the book is a webinar that is coming up. If you're listening to it before April 18th, Elisabeth is presenting a webinar as part of the KaiNexus Continuous Improvement webinar series. It's titled Deepen Your Lean Leadership Skills with Brain Science. I'll put a link in the show notes for registration. If you're listening to this or watching it after April 18th, the recording will be available. So I hope people will go and check that out. And I'll also put a link in the show notes to kind of a quick preview that Elisabeth and I did as part of the KaiNexus podcast series. But I don't know, maybe can I put you on the spot for an elevator pitch type description of the webinar?
Yeah. So this is born of the work I did with the book. A lot of the topics, what I realized was there's kind of underlying human foibles, right? Sort of people-centric stumbles that often are the result of the way we're wired. And once you're aware of it, which I spent time trying to understand, well, why does that happen? And then it was like, oh, well, then here's a great way to deal with that. So just knowing kind of what it is why we fall into the things we do when we don't have the impact we want, right? We want to have good influence. And when we don't, these are some tips on why and how to experiment your way out of it.
So there's going to be a lot to learn. Again, April 18th. Look for a link in the show notes or the YouTube description, or you can also go to kainexus.com/webinar. So let's talk about Picture Yourself a Leader. I'm going to start off by reading the full blurb that I wrote. This may embarrass you, or hopefully
bring it on.
Bring it on, Mark.
Bring it on.
So it was a bit long, but I'm just going to read it. Picture Yourself a Leader is a creatively written guide full of bite-sized morsels that provide nourishment and support for newcomers to continuous improvement, change management, and problem solving, and for experienced leaders. Individuals can read the book or jump around to the tidbit you need at the moment, but it's also well suited for teams and book club discussions. So Elisabeth shares her thoughts and experiences along with her own illustrations with humor and jargon-free clarity. Also deftly incorporates quote unquote wisdom of the crowd nuggets from other people in her professional circles, in these lean circles. And then I ended it with picture yourself ... a reader of this book. So
I should hold up the book so they can see where that quote ended up, Mark.
I don't have a copy in hand yet. You've got one. You should. There you go. Okay. Yeah. On the back of the book.
So there's Mark Graven. I pulled that last piece there, but actually that quote, you touch on every kind of salient aspect of the book. You are deft. That's good.
I didn't mean to write a book report. But
no, it was.
It felt
you, and there's a lot there. Thank you, but you captured it. So that is a great one to read.
Okay, well, sure. So, there's a lot there, meaning in the book, and I think it's cool that it can be used so many different ways. So, I always look to ask an author, I'm going to do this here. Tell us the story behind the book? Like, what was the spark of all the different things that you could write? Why this book? Why this format? I know I jammed a bunch of questions there together, but
yeah, that's all right. I'm going to field them all, Mark. I got
sure.
this. So you hit on twice, or maybe this was when we were doing the thing, how long I've been at this. I don't know if we call it our work world. It's been over 3 decades. So I have had, as you have, probably a lot of different hats, and then an arc of learning, an arc of getting good at what we do. And part of learning, as I think there's a book of yours coming out soon, it involves making mistakes and then taking what you can and will from those mistakes.
Yeah.
So early on in COVID, like a lot of people, I had more time than I expected on my hands, and I started thinking, well, let me start writing up some of these things I've figured out. And the other aspect that drove this was stories in themselves. I use stories all the time. I use them to teach. And I remember finding out over time that those are the things that stuck. If I told a story, people remembered. So I thought, well, let me pull those stories together. And these are stories where it made clear either something that we all do, and don't realize it, or a story where I just didn't quite understand something, and then suddenly it was clear. So I wanted to pull those stories together. So I started posting them on LinkedIn, and then I would basically ask our community, this is what I did, this is what I figured out. What have you experienced, or what have you figured out? And they responded. So, and sometimes, as you've probably seen, you hit a nerve, right? And suddenly this thing has gone into a massive conversation, and it's back and forth, and there's a lot of people chiming in. And sometimes they gave me a different perspective, or they challenged the way I presented something and said, actually, I see it this way. And so I took in a lot of, it was almost like learning again through posting this story and the question. So the wisdom of the crowd section was born of, well, how do I keep that? How do I, include that in the book? Because to me, that was a rich part of this experience of writing all of these blogs over a year or so. So I started to select, like just curate. All right, I'm going to try to get 3 that expand the conversation, bring a different example or a technique. So I've just started to pull that together. So that I did that, and then that left me with, well, then I don't want to. I want to tie up what changed, right? So then just a reflection after that of like, well, taking it all in, because there's a lot of voices I can't put in the book. I couldn't include them all. So this is where I got to with this, and then asking the reader, how about you? Like, is this an issue for you? What would you like to experiment with, right? And just asking a few key questions.
Yeah. Tell us more about sketching or drawing. I'm not sure if either or both of those words the right word to use, or tell us about sort of like that practice or that habit and how that became part of the book, the illustrations with each chapter.
Another good question. And it's funny because I initially called them doodles. And then I had a couple of colleagues reach out and go, those aren't doodles, those are drawings. I was like, okay, they're drawings. But I have my family, my father taught sculpture and art history at the Museum of Fine Arts School in Boston. My mother is a painter. She's in galleries. She's still selling paintings. My brother-in-law is in galleries and paintings. My sister is a ceramic. I could keep going. There's just siblings, and my stepfather wrote and illustrated his own 2 cookbooks. So all around me are, to my mind, real artists. So I kind of relegated myself to, I'm the redheaded stepchild. I never had red hair, by the way. That's just an expression. But I do like to draw. And I think it was Karen Ross. I was working with her on something, and she said, well, do a drawing. So I started drawing more. And then I thought, well, what if I captured this issue in an image? And it's kind of a combination of cartoon and a contour drawing. but mainly
what's a contour drawing? Sorry.
A contour drawing, they would have you watch, like if I was looking at you and I would have a piece of paper, I wouldn't look at it and I would just outline, I would just draw you and I wouldn't, and I wouldn't look down. Of course, everyone looks down a little bit. And those are just, they get nice detail, nice, interesting sort of elements of the person. So I try to get a little more detail of people, because what I find dissatisfying in a lot of graphics that we see in the lean community, or to illuminate the people in a process or what they're part of it, they're either faceless or the faces are just completely bland. And I thought, yeah, but it's the expressions, it's the emotion that tells the story, right? There's things that, made you pissed, it made you angry or curious or shocked, or I want to see that. I feel like that's the thing we don't acknowledge in the workplace, which is emotion, and it's there.
Yeah. Yeah. And drawings capture that, I think, in a different way. I'm terrible. I mean, I'm not an artist. I could doodle, I guess, but I wouldn't put drawings of mine in a book. I would be real self-conscious about that. Maybe I need to get past that and just try. I mean, like, is there a continuous improvement cycle for
drawing,
or compared to the first ones that you put on LinkedIn, or
interesting question. No one's asked that. So I definitely went back, and even folks on my editorial board gave me feedback and said, this image doesn't quite capture what you said here. I would have thought you would have done blah, blah, blah. Or sometimes they said that. Sometimes they said, I just don't get it, or I'm not seeing that. So I redrew some of the images because there was an arc, right? Initially, it was like, I just felt like, I'll just slap that out and put it in. And after a while, I was like, no, I think I want to have a certain shape to this. I want to have, the people be more a part of it. So there was an arc to that. And there was also some of them I just threw photos in, which people love, but I was like, I want this all to be illustrated. So yeah, so I did actually go through two things. One, upgrading it as I went through the editing process, but also I think there was an arc throughout where I got a little more curious about, well, how would you draw a horse? How would you draw a book? Like, that was interesting. It was fun. I sort of looked at different sources.
Yeah. And I was going to ask also, thinking of continuous improvement cycles. One thing you said a couple of minutes ago stood out to me, and I jotted it down. When you were engaging with people in LinkedIn, that question, as you asked it, what have you figured out? Like, I think that's powerful. Like, to me, that is about experiments and learning by doing, and PDSA cycles, or however you want to describe it. What have you figured out versus what do you know? Like, tell me more, like, your thoughts of, like, the difference between those questions, figuring it out versus knowing.
That's great too. So what do you know? And you might respond with, this is what you do. And what have you figured out? What happened was I heard stories. Like, some of those quotes in the book are really miniature stories. Like, this happened to me and I learned this, and I'll never do this again. Or I will always respect that. You know what I mean? It was, I actually I started to really appreciate people responding with that, because it was, wow, you encapsulated a fairly big kind of learning cycle in that little quote.
Yeah. So I would encourage people keep figuring it out.
Yeah. Have that attitude.
And I think your book is going to prompt a lot of reflection and discussion for individuals or teams to keep doing that. So let's talk a little bit about, who the book is written for. Like, I noticed the title is, of course, Picture Yourself a Leader. I don't know, like, if you had thought of, is it Picture Yourself a Lean Leader? Like, is it in your mind a lean leadership book, or is it really just about good leadership, maybe influenced by lean?
Good question again. So I think initially it's coming from my world, our world, which is continuous improvement.
Right.
And the stories, especially like the first chapter, are really the foibles that we get into. Like getting really good at rework. But that's also goes beyond the lean world. I think anyone can recognize, oh yeah, I've seen that, or we do that. And so the more I went through the editing process, I felt like it kept expanding, so that the final people I had look at it were not in the lean world. And I said, just you tell me, does this resonate? And it did. And they said, oh God, yeah, this made me think about, what did I do raising my son? And I wrote him an email right away. It's like, did I do this? And they're, no, you were fine. And so there was it, and in that edit, like you said, jargon free, I worked really hard at just pulling those last pieces out that I didn't even see, right? I mean, I'm very much, don't give me acronyms, don't give me jargon, give me, spell it out. And that helped me with that last round. So I came back and thought, yeah, probably the person who, somebody who might get every single story out of this would be someone who's becoming a lean leader. But the vast majority of the book is just about helping people see that they do have impact, whether they know it or not, and getting a handle on that influence and being a good leader, whether that you're a leader in your family, a leader at work, a leader in a club you're in, a sports team, whatever it is. These things are about the impact you have on other people, which is everybody.
Yeah. So back to that, this idea of everybody and the impact that we have on others. The word leader, people could say that's a title, that's a role, that's a personality. I don't know, maybe there's other words you could use, but one thing you say with the book is the word leader can mean many things. Like tell us more of your thoughts on that. How can everybody be a leader in some way?
I think that it's kind of key that people open their eyes to that, because without doing that, you don't realize that you are. And I think some people are surprised when someone says to them, well, I took your advice, or, you did this, so I thought she did that, I'll do this. And you think, wow, someone's watching what I do. Someone's watching. And it's just, I think some people don't realize, and how can we all realize all the impacts that we have? But just that sense of, you don't know that you're leading in these moments. Like, how you treat one sibling informs your other siblings. Like you're in that moment a leader. So taking stock of that, I feel like, is something we don't always do. We just don't always see those moments.
So what I hear you saying is that leadership extends beyond workplace, whoever's providing your paycheck. Leadership extends to family, neighborhood, community, other settings.
Yeah, leadership is happening everywhere. And what?
So we hope.
Well, I didn't say good leadership.
Okay. Sometimes there's an absence of leadership, but
sometimes there's an absence of leadership. Yeah. Actually, yes. And I think we don't always see we could fill that gap, right? Whatever that is, and that the things that we're doing are influencing people to maybe step up or not. And yeah, you could have a title. Maybe you don't want a title. Maybe you're happy with informal leadership. I remember when we did that whole segment on improv, but for a long time there, I was really happy playing side characters. I love the feeling of like maybe even stealing a scene. I wasn't the protagonist. I was just a character, but so people not realizing that even as they are not playing this true leadership role, they might be a side character, but they are having an impact, and to own that and think about, what do you want out of that? What do you want people to do? What do you want to happen around you? I think we don't always own our own power. We sometimes think, oh, I wish that wouldn't happen. I wish people wouldn't do that. And it's like, yeah, well, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. Right.
And this is asking those questions, like, what if you could do something about that? What would it be? What would that look like?
Yeah. Yeah. To picture yourself a leader as a certain title. Right. Do you think some people have trouble picturing themselves as a leader, kind of thing, just directly from the book's title?
I do. I think some people would react. I think few people would react and go, I don't have to picture myself a leader. I am a leader, know?
Right.
But I think some people, it's foreign. It's this, well, I could never be, or who would see me as a leader? And it's like, well, I think you would have to see it first, or maybe open your ears and eyes to someone else seeing it, because we often don't realize that someone else is seeing that and asking you to step up. So, yeah, I think there's that an invitation.
Yeah, you're making me think of a story real quick of somebody I was working with in a hospital laboratory 15 years ago, and I've told his story in the book Lean Hospitals, where there was a guy, John, who was a top individual contributor, and as organizations tend to do, they had many times offered him a supervisor role, and he had always turned it down. And as I was working with John on this Lean project, and they were starting to explore Lean leadership, Lean problem solving, if you will. I mean, you explained that, to him, being the supervisor was always sort of like being the workplace police, and he didn't want to be doing that. He wanted to be helpful, of not just like catching people doing something wrong. And so then the opportunity was there as the lab director, and as they were starting to embrace and try to build this Lean culture, he ended up taking a supervisor role, or I think it was even a manager role, because they had redefined expectations of leaders. And now suddenly that, I think he was always a leader, but like he finally now found a situation where it was compatible with how he wanted to be.
That is a great story. And it highlights one of the chapters, which was about being thrust into a supervisory or a management role without really having all of the skills needed for that. And the story I told was me at, I was 25, and it was a Apple II developer out in California. This is before, there was the whole tech bubble. This is in the 80s. I did everything. I was a tech writer, not a tech writer. I was a tech support, right? I was writing because people were trying to put our software together with all different printers and devices, and we had to troubleshoot. And then I was in charge of all of tech support. And then since I was writing all of the templates and the letters, they were like, oh, she can write. Why don't you be a tech writer? Because this is back when we made actual manuals, and they were they were nice. They were like, we had a great graphic designer, man. These things were slick and pretty. So I did that, and then they were like, oh, you're great. Now you be head of production, and you work with the beta testers, and you work with the tech writers. So the guy that hired me, who was older than me, came from Gloucester, Mass. And now I'm in charge of him. And I'm in charge of all the tech support that I kind of came up through the ranks with. I in charge of all the tech writers that I had been working with. And some, hired as tech writers before me and saw themselves as, that's my role. Anyway, I was not prepared for these guys not wanting to report, first of all, to a woman. And also kind of what you described, the gentleman in the story you just told, like having to be the police.
Yeah.
And not having any skills around, well, how do you deal with performance issues and not be the police? How do you navigate that?
Yeah.
And I reached, and Hugh Alley, who wrote Becoming the Supervisor, chimed in on that post. And he was so helpful in that realm. And obviously that's his wheelhouse. So he said, here's the 5 things you need, and you didn't have that. And I was like, oh, like that was such a great, crystalline, and it helped me make sense of that past, that still felt kind of bad. Like, oh, that was so bad. That helped my decision to leave California. Not the only thing. I was like, I think I'm going back east now. I think I'm done with this. Yeah, that is a hard thing, that official title and what goes with it. And when you move from being good at what you do to managing other people, and that's then you got a whole other realm of influence you got to manage.
Yeah. So again, we're joined by Elisabeth Swan. Picture Yourself a Leader is the book. Let's do a little author talk of thinking back to the Hamilton line, how the sausage gets made. We were in the room where, I don't sing either, but as much as I love music, if we were in the room where it happened, as so to speak, tell us more. You mentioned editing. Like, I'd be curious to hear what your process was in terms of writing, editing, refining, PDSA cycles in terms of the book. Can you tell us a little bit about like the process? What type of iteration was happening?
I would say first off, I loved it. I love the process of going back and forth with people. And you're one of the people I've gone back and forth with, just like, what does this sound like? What do you think of this? But on a broader level, it's been PDSA from the start. Like, it's been so interesting. First off, I had naively thought, oh, blog to book, you put all your blogs together and you publish them. Like, whoa, that's so easy. So, okay, that was wrong. And then it was, well, what is it? What is the book?
Yeah.
I'm going to pull them together, but what does that look like? So at that same time, the Kata Geek Girls were starting a Kata practice cohort. So I dove in, and Maria Grzyonka was my coach. And my book challenge was, what is it, right? What does this thing look like? Who's it for? Just trying to work that. So we did literally PDSA cycles on, what's the purpose? What's the why of this book? What does it look like? I played with layouts. I played with what's included in each chapter because it was going to be different, right? It's not just apparently blog to book.
Well, but don't be too hard on yourself, because I guess I can do that. We're an author to author section. I'm going to bring up my book. Forgive me.
Yeah, do it.
My book, all I have is a printout of a cover design.
But it's awesome.
The mistakes that make us. Thank you. But you were saying, okay, the original concept was blog to book. My original concept was podcast to book. My favorite mistake. I've got these great stories from all my guests. I know I can't use them all, but stitch them together. I'm like, no, that wasn't really gonna work either, because people could go read the podcasts on the web, the transcripts on the website.
Right.
Why put it in a book? So again, iteration back to the concept, purpose, design, and structure.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. And it makes me even more curious about what's going to happen with your book. So remind me to come back to my cover, because that was another really fun PDSA. But what you just described hit a nerve, which is what I wanted personally. I wanted the book. I wanted to have my blogs and be able to reference them. I wanted to be able to say, oh, where's that story? Let me go look at that. Let me go pull this up. I would sometimes use the image and the question in our leadership class as a warm-up question. It was something along the theme of what we were going to teach about a Lean Six Sigma leader for that open session. And so that became great fodder. So I wanted it. And then also the process of then having an editorial board, and you have to decide how many people you're going to listen to, right? And of course, and how many people want to have that conversation with you. Yeah. And then what do different people bring, right? So you get very different takes on what you do. And I had it was funny, one editorial board member sort of warned me, said, I may say things that are completely out of line and I may infuriate you, and all this kind of warning up front.
Yeah.
And it ended up being such helpful. I mean, I know you appreciate it too. You want to hear, you want to know, like, does this resonate, not resonate? And it was just so helpful to hear things like, this one doesn't end on a hopeful note. Like, you always end on such a hope, give us something to hope for here.
Was that a section that had one of my wisdom of the crowd stories? I don't always end on an uplifting note. That might have been my fault.
No, it wasn't you.
Okay.
And also just the story structure. Like, I've studied story, sort of, it was like, so I need to come to what's the resolution? What's the change? What happened here? Right. So always coming. And so the person was sort of calling me out for, I don't hear the resolution. I don't hear what's the change here. But that told me, oh, you hear it elsewhere. So this is coming through. This is good. And just, we've taught, you probably deal with this all the time, but, letting go of words, right? People saying, I remember someone saying, like, well, this one here, I don't think you're adding anything. Aside from the fact that it's like 3 different cliches, it's like, ow. But that's good. That's great. Yeah. I don't want a single cliche in this book, man. Let's get that out of there.
Yeah.
So that I felt like was the online process was a collaboration, and then the editorial process is a collaboration. And those, it's a build. So that just feels that's I think a really rewarding process. I don't know about you, but I think that's.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you want honest feedback where it may, some of it may sting, but then, you take a breath and you come back, hey, that person's right. And I can come back and then that, or sometimes I jump right to like, yeah, you're right. That was not written clearly at all. I try not to beat myself up, just go back and try again and fix it. You need people pointing that out. But, I think of like a book as a startup product. In entrepreneurship circles or lean startup circles, they always talk about the potential trap of asking friends and family for feedback about your product, your app, your software, your business. Because people might be nice, right? They might not, they might say nice things, but I'll give a shout out and credit to Karen Ross, who helped me understand a lot of this. Kind is really what you're looking for, right? You don't want someone to be mean and rip what you've done, but kind is like helpful, like challenging, and as opposed to just what would you think of the book? Like, I loved it. Like, okay, well that might be true, but that's not very helpful.
Yeah.
You've got to maybe you think of who do you reach out to? Somebody doesn't know you at all, they might be a little leery of giving the feedback. And if someone knows you too well, they might say, well, I don't want to hurt Elisabeth's or Mark's feelings.
Yeah.
I guess this comes back to the art of like, who do you ask for input?
Yeah. No, I think it's really critical because you want the kindness, right? Not the sort of pablum or, you're good.
Yeah.
But you and you want it in a way you can hear it. Right. So, and sometimes it might sting and you might go, okay, I'm just going to sit with that. I'll come back. And then you might read it as, I don't know if you ever do this. You look at feedback and in your mind, it was like, a punch, a left jab. And then the next day you might go look at it and go again and say, actually, that wasn't really a left jab. That's actually, that's not sharp. It's just, it's fairly accurate. And that's probably what got me is that, yeah, that's true. It's like there's humor. The book has a lot of humor in it. And sometimes the jokes didn't land. And sometimes it was because it's I don't know where this expression comes. It's like the curse of knowing, like, all this stuff. So you think you have shorthand. Right. And so you think these 2 sentences tell the joke and actually it's missing a sentence. So that was just a warning, like you need to explain a little better because I don't really get it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's very true. That could be not just a joke, but explaining some concept. And like trying to be able to go back and read or have others read as a novice to what you're trying to write, can be very helpful. My last book, Measures of Success, it's about statistics and charts, and it's not full of formulas or anything, but I tried to check for reading comprehension by asking people who knew nothing about TQM, statistical process control, whatever. Just like, is this like, I'm not dumbing things down, but I want to make sure it's clear. I think you have to get that feedback. If you're writing a book about lean and you have it reviewed by a bunch of really knowledgeable lean people, they might miss something that would be unclear to a novice. Maybe not, but there's that risk.
Yep. No, that's a really good. And I don't know about you, I'm assuming that was a late edit. Having the novice take a look was after you'd been through rounds with your editorial group?
Well, actually, the copy editor that I was using at the time, who had done some work with me on lean hospitals, like, this was not her domain at all. So she was doing not just copy editing around grammar, but she was also kind of doing those continual readability checks.
That's actually great. That was, I believe, the first person who was not in our realm was my copy editor.
Yeah.
And he told me when he would write lines that cracked him up. And then he would say, wow, this made me think, and I want to get copies of this for my daughters. Like, it was just like, and this is not someone who ever says anything he doesn't mean.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that was huge. That was actually a big turning point for me. I was like, oh, okay. If he got this, then I think this has legs.
So let's talk a little more about, process of bringing a book to market. You wanted me to come back to PDSA on the cover.
Oh, yeah.
Why don't we talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, just you and I went back and forth. You shared with me, I was showing you my cover, and you shared with me yours, which is...
Hold it up again for the YouTube viewers.
Okay.
The front of the book. I don't think you showed the front of the book.
I did not show the front. So
show the front of the book. There we go.
Let's see if I can get that sitting up there. Okay.
Good.
So that's the cover of my book. And so it was the process of a cover, working with a designer, and I'll be interested if this aligns with your experience. I love your cover, by the way.
Thank you.
So the process is, tell us covers you like. What are covers you're drawn to, right? So what do you like?
Yeah.
And then what kinds of elements do you see in the cover? What are colors you're drawn to, or not color, or fonts, anything that is, in your mind, that let's make it explicit for the designer to work with. And then they give you a bunch of options, right?
Now, but before you go further in that, did they also ask you to share is it helpful to share some examples of ones you don't like?
Ooh.
Of not just, hey, I like these, and then here are some that I think no, or was it more from that positive?
They didn't ask that, but what was tough was I gave books I liked, but they're not my book, right? So I like, do you know the book, what is it, Essentialism? It's got this great image of kind of a snarl. It's very simplistic and stark and white, and it's got this snarl of red twine, and just the word essentialism coming out, and it's so striking. But I was like, but that's not how my book cover would work. So it was, the best conversation was getting us together, looking at covers. Like, you could go on Pinterest and say, let's show us some great book covers, something like that.
Yeah.
But I found it still tough. It's almost like blank slate. Where are we going with this? What are we going to do? But one of the through lines was, you're an illustrator. You've illustrated this book. There's, 60, 70 of your drawings in here. So shouldn't there be some of your drawings on the cover? Okay. And then it was, picture, one of the first images was a frame, right? Picture yourself, there you are in a frame. But then I thought, well, if I draw a face in there, then that's who the leader is. So it was like, well, what if it's a mirror? But then it just kept feeling like too on point, like, okay, picture. And And then it was, but the illustrations aren't popping for me. They feel like clutter. Like I'm not enjoying my illustrations in this iteration. And then they took a series of them kind of in little squares and angled them up the page. And that had movement and felt like, oh, that's interesting. And someone said, oh, it's kind of like a movie, you know?
Yeah.
And then I thought, oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. It still is not capturing me, but it's capturing me more. So I sat down with a friend, I think over the weekend, and she's got a design background. And I just started thinking, okay, what if we really took a movie reel and then my illustrations, it could be a mix of them because there's so much in here. It's not just, humans, but anyway, so that ended up being that image, right? So that's the movements. I took that so that was the PDSA, right? So many rounds there.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. It's funny you say movie. I looked at it like a roll of film because the images were very different.
Yeah.
But, we explained TQM. We have to explain what a roll of film is.
Oh my God, yeah. I there's so many things I had to call out. Someone I was like, what was that old? Do you remember the old copy machine? Mimeograph.
Oh yeah.
And I had to describe what a mimeograph was.
Print.
It was like you had
the blue on the white paper, and somebody would have to like literally crank out the copies.
Yeah, and in grade school, I was a teacher's pet, and so I got to go and mimeograph the exam or whatever it was. And I remember liking the smell of the mimeograph machine. Right, that ink had a distinct smell to it. So yeah, that's taken me way back. So anyway, a film strip, a movie reel, the movie camera film. Yeah, just that. And I think also I'm a huge movie fan. So that was like very appealing for me. I'm like, oh, good. I could just pull it all together.
Yeah. Yeah. But iterations. And then you hit a point where you're like, yes. It's like the Ted Lasso moment where he runs back into the room. You're like, yes.
Yes. Yes. And of course, the designer is waiting patiently for me to get to that.
Right.
Like, say yes.
Yeah. Well, I'll share. I mean, my book cover was a collaborative, iterative process with an old friend of mine who's a professional artist, graphic designer. Doesn't normally do book covers, right? So he wasn't too locked into, well, here's the way I normally do a book cover. But maybe we can save that story if I can come on Just in Time Cafe sometime.
Oh, please come on Just in Time Cafe, because man, that book's coming out soon, and I am very excited to hear.
So I don't want to take away from discussion of picture yourself a leader, but I think one thing I'm going to do, and I know I think Dawn would be fine with this, is I'm actually going to do a blog post that shows the evolution and iteration. Where I'll tell a quick story. I said I wasn't going to do this, but just real quickly. Started with 6 pencil sketch concepts, and then we kind of narrowed in on one, and then it's gone through at least 10 cycles of iteration along the way. So I think I'll share some of that. It might be interesting to see how some of that sausage gets made.
Good for you. Yeah, that's interesting to look back at what were those iterations, what were those cycles, and what did we take from one and go to the next. And some of them might be, we took that, and then we went, actually, let's go back to this.
Yeah.
So it's not like linear.
Right. For sure. So, but back to your book, and whether it's the title or the cover or, I mean, there's all these decisions to make, and I think this is also like entrepreneurship. Like, you want to get input, people who are proxies for the voice of the customer, if you will. But then at some point, like, you've got your vision, and it's your name on the cover, Elisabeth. Like, at some point, you got to say, like, okay, I like this. I'm gonna do this. Like, how did you have any moments where you were trying to find that balance of, like, respecting and accepting the input versus saying, well, here's my vision?
There were all along the way, because on the one hand, like you said, it's voice of the customer. I have to listen to this. And sometimes early on, it would be, I want to wait and see if anyone else says this. I want to hear if anybody else hits this. And sometimes and even if it was 2 people, I'm like, okay, I got to listen to that. Mm-hmm. But sometimes it was one, and the one reviewer who said, feel free to toss it out, to completely ignore, might be off the mark. And that stuck with me. It's like, okay, some of them might be off the mark for what I'm trying to do. I think, and some people said, I don't know if you want this. And I'm thinking, I do. I want that. So those decisions, and like you said, finally coming to, yeah, it's my decision. I'm going to have to do this. I will tell you one funny story about some of the decisions. And one of them was, the conversation was, how do I make sure? Someone said, you don't sign your illustrations per se. You put a little swan there, right? Sort of the S of your name and a swan, but you don't write Swan or Elisabeth Swan. So I want to, how do you make sure people know that those are your illustrations? And I was talking about this with my husband, and he said, why don't you put written and illustrated by Elisabeth Swan on the cover?
Yeah.
Like, oh, duh. That should have occurred to me.
Yeah, you're right. There it is. The preview copy you had sent me, there is that symbol, and I mean that seems like something like a professional cartoonist would do. Like they have
yes
thing.
I think as of having sold these now, I am professional. Yeah. I've now have illustrated, and someone's actually paid for the illustrations. I got a book too, but that's know.
So a couple of questions before we wrap up, Elisabeth. Oh my God, we could talk for hours about the topics and everything in the book. We'll come back away from some of the author thoughts and tips, but I'm sure people who are listening are writing or considering writing a book. But looking at the content, and there's two sections here. At the risk of it seeming self-serving, I want to talk about the two sections where I had contributed one of these wisdom of the crowd stories. I had to pick two, so I picked those. One was, you've already mentioned earlier, acronyms, and you call it heading off the head scratchers. Tell us a little bit about that, and then I'll just my story is real short. I'll tack onto it, but.
Yeah, that one it's part of that, what I described, kind of that curse of knowledge. And acronyms, in our world, the consulting world, when we go work with a new organization, it felt like there's always this exchange of acronyms. Like, we've got SIPOX and DMAIC and PDCA, and then they've got to give us all their acronyms. And it's shorthand for them, and it's language. We have two different languages. And it contributes to distance. Once you know it, you're in an in crowd. And if you don't, you're out. And it keeps people, I think, from embracing something that we're trying to teach, right? How do you invite someone when they don't know what you're talking about? So I was joking around about just all the acronyms that get flown around, and sometimes I have no idea what they are. Or parents, as soon as they cop on to what the latest acronyms their kids are using in text, the kids have moved on. Like, that's an old one, and you're dating yourself by even using it. So yeah, that was about clarity and conversation.
Yeah. And then the little story that I added in there was about a time when I worked at the Lean Enterprise Institute. I don't think I shared some of this detail in the book, but I'll say it here. I was working with Rachel Regan, who I think is great, and if she's listening, hi Rachel. But I remember there was something she made reference to. It was on a whiteboard, or it was on a calendar or something, and it said "FU meeting." And I was like, "Wait, what? Like, what's the problem? She's like, "Oh." She was like, "No, it doesn't mean anything bad." When she was at Toyota, it was a very common acronym for follow-up. Like, okay, there we go. But I asked instead of just making an assumption of.
I love that, the FU meeting. And then you just showed me you had FU in some a column of information that you were sharing, a spreadsheet of like, it's FU.
Let me again mention the KaiNexus webinar that Elisabeth is presenting on April 18th. We have a checklist / planning document, and we've done more than 100 webinars now in the spreadsheet column that lined up with Elisabeth's. was column FU. No, no offense.
You're like, hey, check it out. There's FU again. I think that post was born of my irritation with all the posts about VUCA. And they'd say, VUCA this, VUCA that. What do you do about VUCA? And I said, that's VUCA, which stands for volatility. I'm going to get this wrong. Uncertainty. Oh, what's the C? Yeah. Anyway, so I'm already lost it.
Google save me. Volatility. I had to Google it. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity.
Okay. So those terms mean something to me, but when I hear that word, it sounds like a cat coughing up a hairball. So it was just like, what? Come on. Like, do we have to speak in this? And like you did, and I just did, and we're familiar with this term. I don't remember what it means, but yeah, it's a plague.
Yeah.
All right. What's the other one?
The other one was about perfecting rework, and I'll tell the short version. What I wrote was longer. I'll tell the short example, but tell us why that's a problem worth addressing in organizations or for leaders.
Yeah, there's probably some great quotes from Dr. Deming or Peter Drucker, but it's like, it's just doing something really well that we shouldn't be doing at all.
Yeah.
And it's, we don't question it. We sort of deal with, we have to do this thing because we get this wrong or this doesn't work. We haven't figured out how to make it work. So we just got really good at getting really fast at the fix. And the story I told there was, I don't know if you want me to tell the story, but it's this was going to a play with my husband, and we had to drive up to Boston, and it was put on by Harvard. Harvard has ART, the American Repertory Theater, and it's big ART acronym. And so we were, of course, hit traffic, and it's a friend of our son who's in the play. I think it was Donnie Darko, and very excited to see this young talent. And we found a parking space, also a miracle in Harvard Square, and raced right into the ticket booth. And the woman, as soon as we put our tickets down, handed me the sheet of paper with a picture or a layout map of Harvard Square and a yellow Sharpie highlighter line through it, and said, here's where the theater is. If you go and present this, they'll know what to do. So it was like, okay, grab the things. Now we're racing across the square, up and down into back streets, and find another theater apparently associated with the ART called, One Arrow Theater, which happens to be the address, One Arrow Street. So get in there, and there's a whole bunch of people standing in line with this yellow highlighted map. And she says, the woman at this theater says, okay, there's about to be a lights out moment. So then you guys are all going to file in, and we left the front row open. So you can just sit down in the front row, and you haven't missed more than blah, blah, blah. So we're like, okay. So we lights down, we got in there, we got a front row seat, and, we watched, I don't know how much of the play we missed, but got, a great seat.
Yeah.
And clearly they had this great rework for the fact that everybody thought it was the ART, but it was actually a different theater. Anyway, we do it all the time.
Yeah. How do we get back to the root cause and prevent it? The one Demingism I'm thinking of is maybe one of the meaner things he said, but I think it's kind of spot on. I think he called it the American way of making toast. You burn it, I'll scrape it.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful.
But the one example I used, and I see too much of it, is just in a nutshell, how often before a case in an operating room, they'll open the surgical packs and find something lost, missing, broken. Well, lost and missing are the same thing, I guess. Lost, broken, dirty. And you can get really good at that response loop, as opposed to going back and saying, how do we make sure instruments aren't missing, not put in if they're broken, less likely to look or at least give the appearance of being dirty. And I mean, you can do both if you don't have perfect mistake proofing, but I think sometimes people don't challenge the need. How do we eliminate the rework cycle instead of doing the rework better?
Yeah. And it's just, you get caught up in perfecting it and stop. And it takes like a beat to go, well, how about we go back to, like you just said, how do we not have those things happen? Which is the harder thing to do.
Yes. And people might be aware, and then they might say, hey, we don't have time because there's so much rework. That existential
we have to work the backlog first, and then we'll get to fixing it.
Yeah. But there are so many gems and great ideas and reflections and stories in the book. Again, it's Picture Yourself a Leader. Elisabeth Swan is the author. I'll put links in the show notes. Elisabeth with an S, ElisabethSwan.com. So, thank you so much for doing the episode here today. Thank you for, congratulations on the book. Thank you in advance for doing that KaiNexus webinar. I hope people will check it out.
Yeah, please do. Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me. This was a ball.
This was fun. Thanks.